The file came to me sealed in a gray envelope, the paper soft from age and moisture. No index number, no retrieval code, just a handwritten note across the flap. Do not catalog. North Hollow Annex. There was a smell when I opened it. The faint sweetness of mildew and disinfectant, the kind used to scrub away things that stain too deeply. Inside were fragments, typewritten pages warped by humidity, brittle carbon copies of shift logs, and a spool of quarter-inch magnetic tape so brittle it cracked at my touch. None of it was formally archived. Someone had gone to great effort to bury it in the unmarked shelf between medical and municipal recoveries, a place for things that don't fit either description. The name North Hollow meant nothing to me at first. There are dozens of forgotten psychiatric facilities scattered through the northern states, most abandoned long before the world ended. But the more I read, the more I began to recognize the pattern. This one closed suddenly, without a public notice. Staff left mid-shift. Records end abruptly in March of 1972. There's no incident report, only a collection of voices orbiting a single room, 6B, a place that, by all surviving accounts, should have been empty. I've spent long enough with these documents to know when a story resists documentation. The tone changes between pages. Handwriting falters. Typewritten lines begin to overlap, as if the machine itself grew uncertain of what it was recording. It is not the words that disturb me. It's the quiet places between them, the moments the author stopped trying to make sense. If I sound tired, perhaps I am. There are some stories you read and then file away. Others follow you when the lights dim in the vault. I will tell you this one as it was pieced together from the surviving records, not verbatim, but as clearly as my mind will allow. The North Hollow Psychiatric Annex, the light in room 6B, and the people who, for a few winter months in 1972, tried to understand why an unpowered room refused to stay dark. The Archivist, Vault 13. North Hollow was not a large institution. 47 rooms across 3 wards, built in the late 1940s when the state believed concrete and isolation could cure the mind. By the 1970s, it was a shadow of itself. Half the building condemned, pipes frozen every winter, the smell of damp plaster heavy in every corridor. Patients and staff alike called it the Hollow, not for its location, but for the sound the halls made when the wind passed through. In early January, the electrical system on the 3rd floor began to fail. Fluorescents hummed with a faint blue tone. Circuit breakers tripped without warning. The maintenance logs note repeated complaints of flickering lights in the east wing, particularly in room 6B, a single bedroom reserved for temporary observation. The orderlies replaced the bulb 3 times in a single week. Each burned out within hours. Finally, the supervisor disconnected power to the fixture entirely. A note in red pencil reads, "Breaker for 6B off. Do not reconnect." And yet, weeks later, staff began to report seeing a light under its door. The first recorded mention came from Thomas Greer, a young night orderly who had transferred from the county hospital the previous autumn. His handwriting in the preserved incident logs is steady at first, matter of fact, the tone of a man simply doing his job. He wrote that during rounds at 2:17 a.m., he noticed a faint yellow glow beneath the door of 6B. The room was locked and unoccupied. He checked the panel, power still off. He called through the door, received no reply, and heard what he described as slow, wet breathing. When he returned minutes later, the light was gone. I found Greer's words almost clinical in their restraint. That is, until you read his personal notebook, found years later in a staff locker swollen with water damage. There, his tone changes. He writes that the light pulsed like a heartbeat, brightening and dimming every few seconds, that he could feel the rhythm in his own chest, as though the building itself were trying to teach him to breathe in time. He dreamed of the door afterward, always half open, a bed within, and something lying beneath the glow. It's easy to dismiss one man's story as fatigue, but Greer wasn't the only one who saw it. The second mention appears in a work order filed by a maintenance trainee named M. Holcomb. The report notes that a nurse on the third floor claimed to see light under the 6B door again, this time accompanied by a low humming noise. Holcomb inspected the breakers, confirmed they were off, and looked through the observation slot. No patient, he wrote, no light. The report was never signed off by a supervisor. The line "hold for follow-up" is underlined twice. By mid-March, the entire night staff knew of the room, though few would speak of it directly. Some referred to it as the lantern, others the breather. In the cafeteria logs, a cook noted that several employees refused to walk the east corridor alone. When the orderlies performed bed checks, they often skipped 6B entirely, signing the sheet as verified without approaching the door. Only Greer continued to log his observations. Night after night, his notes grew longer, stranger. He wrote of hearing movement inside, not footsteps, but the weight of cloth shifting, as if someone turned over in bed. He described the smell of dust and ozone, and how the glow seemed to throb softly, in perfect rhythm with his own pulse. "I do not think it's the bulb," he wrote. "I think the light is higher, above the ceiling, pressing down." Reading that line, I found myself looking up at the vault ceiling, at the soft hum of the lights that never quite go silent here. It's strange how quickly your body mirrors the unease of another, even decades apart. The staff psychologist, Dr. Ellen Cale, tried to dismiss the rumors. In a memo drafted but never sent, she called it collective stress magnified by environmental conditions. Yet her language betrays doubt. She mentions that the staff had begun referring to 6B as occupied, even though the patient roster listed it as permanently sealed. She wrote, "They speak of the room as if it has moods, as if it can be provoked. That line has always stayed with me, because after that memo there are no more maintenance reports, no more staff logs. Only Greer's final note, written 3 days before the annex, closed its doors forever. The door was open tonight. The light is inside, but there's no bulb, no lamp. The glow has shape now, a shape like a bed, with someone lying upon it. I think they're waiting for me to come closer. The next entry in any surviving document is dated March 20th, 1972, the night the facility was evacuated without explanation. No fire, no structural collapse, no official incident, only an entire staff that walked out and never returned. When I first read those dates, I tried to cross-reference state records, but North Hollow's closure was never formally logged. It was as if the annex simply ceased to exist after that night. I've seen this pattern before. Files that refuse to stay complete, rooms that vanish from architectural blueprints, and people whose names remain but whose photographs fade. The Hollow was just one of many. But something about this case feels closer. Maybe it's because the logs describe light, and in Vault 13 we fear the dark. But it is the lights that sometimes behave like living things. The deeper I went into the North Hollow file, the more fragmented it became. Reports overlapped, dates repeated, and multiple typewritten pages bore the same timestamp, as though the staff were rewriting events that had already happened. At first, I thought it was simple clerical error, but even now I am not so sure. Something had begun to happen to the people inside that building. It wasn't sudden. It was quiet, like rust spreading behind paint. By the second week of March 1972, Greer was the only orderly still patrolling the East Corridor at night. Others made excuses to trade shifts or request reassignment to the lower floors. They told the supervisors they were uncomfortable with the lighting. Greer, in his own words, said he couldn't stop checking the door. There's a rhythm in obsession, a pulse that builds the longer you listen. He timed the flicker, 4 seconds bright, 4 seconds dim. After several nights, he found he could anticipate it, his heart and breath adjusting to the pattern as if syncing with something unseen. It is a small thing, but small things are how these places begin to claim people. Dr. Ellen Cale's presence in the records grows sharply during this period. Her memos shift from detached professionalism to an increasingly desperate tone. I've read her handwriting closely. She pressed harder into the page with each entry, as though trying to anchor herself through the act of writing. She wrote that she'd ordered room 6B to remain locked, but staff continued to find it ajar during morning rounds. When questioned, none admitted to opening it. A nurse, Hannah Voss, noted that on certain nights, the corridor temperature would drop sharply, as if air were leaking from an open vent. Yet the vents were sealed, and maintenance found no fault in the heating system. Hannah was known among staff as calm and grounded, but after her final shift in March, she reportedly refused to enter the building again. In a statement later found in her personnel file, she wrote, "I don't think the light wants to hurt anyone. It only wants to be seen. But once you see it, you start seeing it even when you close your eyes." The document ends there, the ink running off the page like she stopped mid-sentence. There's another layer to the story that the official records don't show, a subtle breakdown in communication. Maintenance requests stopped being fulfilled. Power fluctuations were reported in rooms nowhere near 6B. A patient in 5D claimed someone was walking through the walls at night, humming. Dr. Kale began scheduling sessions with staff to address hallucination contagion, a phrase that only appears once in all the recovered documentation. But even she wasn't immune. In a memo dated March 17th, she wrote, "There is a faint luminescence in the east corridor, even when the lights are cut. It follows the contours of the walls like veins. The staff refuse to walk there, so I must verify it myself." It's unclear whether she ever did. Her next entry is an unsigned draft that simply reads, "I think the light knows our names. The tapes from that month are nearly unlistenable, warped and decayed, but you can still hear fragments. The sound of a door creaking open, footsteps, and a man's voice whispering. It's higher than the ceiling now." That voice is presumed to be Greer's. His final written log ends the same night as the last recording. The door isn't a door anymore. The light is making its own space. What fascinates me and disturbs me is how consistent the physiological descriptions are. Staff described shortness of breath, a feeling of pressure behind the eyes, a taste of metal on the tongue. These are all symptoms of exposure to strong electromagnetic fields, or to something that wants to be mistaken for them. After reading the reports, I found myself noticing similar sensations in the vault, though of course our generators hum constantly. I tell myself it's the resonance from the older wiring, nothing more. Still, I sometimes feel that same faint pressure in my chest, especially when I talk about this case aloud. Perhaps I am imagining it, perhaps not. By late March, the institution was unraveling. Orderlies were sleeping in stairwells to avoid the third floor. Patients began reporting dreams of light beneath their doors. One woman was found pressing her hands flat to the wall, whispering that someone was trying to come through from the other side. Dr. Kale's final memorandum, unsigned, unsent, lists 7 staff absences in a single night. She wrote, "The East Wing hums even when power is disconnected." The next morning, the entire facility was abandoned. The evacuation wasn't recorded by the state. No deaths, no transfer lists, no follow-up inspections. Just absence, like someone cut that floor out of the map. I think about Greer sometimes, about the way he kept walking back to that door. He wasn't brave, he was compelled. Every institution has its patterns, its internal rhythms. He found one that pulsed too steadily to resist. When I speak these words aloud, I can almost hear that rhythm again. 4 seconds bright, 4 seconds dim. It's probably the power conduits settling, but I've learned not to count along anymore. There is no single record of what happened the final night. What survives is a scatter of fragments, snapped photographs from a disposable camera, a half-melted tape reel, a few sentences scrawled in the margins of personnel files. When I laid them out in sequence, the pattern looked less like documentation and more like confession. The last date to appear in any of the papers is March 20th, 1972. At 6 p.m., Dr. Kale noted in her log that the power to the entire East Wing had been shut off for scheduled maintenance. She wanted to prove to the staff that Room 6B could not possibly be illuminated. At 6:17, the maintenance supervisor signed a line verifying that the breaker panels were locked out and tagged. At 6:42, the first sighting was reported. 2 patients in Ward A claimed that the walls were glowing. One described the color as bone light. An orderly on the second floor wrote that he could see brightness leaking through the floorboards above him, outlining every nail and seam. And then the voices begin, low, distorted fragments captured on the cracked reel. A woman says, "It's humming through the ceiling." Another voice, Greer's, I think, answers, "No, the ceiling's humming through it." Moments later, there is the sound of doors unlatching, one after another like a chain reaction. When the evacuation team entered the building 2 days later, the third-floor corridor was silent. They found the rooms open, beds empty, sheets still warm as if recently vacated. The walls around 6B had blistered outward as though from extreme heat, but there was no sign of fire. The bulb socket in the ceiling was fused into glass. On the floor beneath it lay Greer's keyring, warped into a loose spiral. No bodies, no footprints, only light damage, so faint that the film couldn't capture it properly. Every photograph taken inside that room came out overexposed, no matter how low the flash setting. There is a single surviving document written after the closure. A letter from a regional inspector, dated April 4th, addressed to the Department of Mental Health. The annex appears structurally sound, but there is an ambient radiance in the East Wing after nightfall. It is not visible to the naked eye until all lights are extinguished. Standing in the corridor, one can see a faint glow outlining the door frames, pulsing at regular intervals. Recommend complete demolition. The demolition never happened. The building was sold, then forgotten, swallowed by development and time. Satellite imagery shows nothing at its coordinates now. Just a stretch of trees and an access road that stops halfway to nowhere. I spent months trying to reconcile the evidence. Every path led back to that same pattern, 4 seconds bright, 4 seconds dim, a rhythm you could almost mistake for breathing. At first, I thought it was collective hysteria amplified by stress, a small-town haunting of the mind. But the pattern repeats elsewhere, in other facilities, other decades. There are reports from a military outpost in 1959, a communications bunker in 1981, even a derelict research site catalogued under another vault entry. Always the same pulse, always light where there should be none. Sometimes I wonder if North Hollow was a point of convergence, a place thin enough that whatever moved through could be seen for an instant. Perhaps the patients and staff weren't witnessing a haunting at all, but a kind of echo, a fragment of something shining through from another layer of the world. Or perhaps it wasn't shining through at all. Perhaps it was learning how to cross. The technical notes on luminescent anomalies suggest that residual energy dissipates quickly once the source is removed. But what if the source isn't bound to a place? What if it binds to the observer? Since cataloging this file, I have noticed small changes in the vault. Nothing drastic, just moments when the overhead lights seem to breathe, dimming and brightening in a slow, steady rhythm. I tell myself it's the generators. I tell myself it's coincidence. And yet I find I can time my breath to it without meaning to. I have sealed the North Hollow case under restricted access. The documents will remain in Vault 13's lower stacks, away from the main archives, where the air stays cold and still. If anyone requests the file, they will find only the inventory card. Room 6B, Unverified Phenomena. I would advise future archivists not to linger on it. Some stories do not want to be remembered. They want to be retold. There is a difference. When the vault lights flicker, I remind myself that electricity here is unreliable. But in the moments between pulses, when the silence stretches and the air tastes faintly of ozone, I think of Thomas Greer standing before that open door, breathing in time with the glow. I think of Dr. Cale writing letters to no one, and I think of the empty room that wanted only to be seen. If you ever come across a light that refuses to burn out, do not look for its power source. Do not count its rhythm. And whatever you do, do not let it learn the pace of your breathing. The Archivist, Vault 13.